This is how the force manufactures light and heat as they are on the Earth, the Sun, and all other planets. The half of the Earth's force, for example, which faces towards the Sun, is a concave lens to the Earth. A similar lens, but far larger, is at the centre. The convex faces of the two lenses are toward each other forever. They are etherically connected by solutions of physical substance needles linear in position. The force is larger than the Earth, so that polar lights are possible on the shadow side, and the brilliancy of the polar lights, the borealis, are proportionately less than daylight at noon in the tropics, exactly in correspondence to the concentration of the rays by a lens of the magnitude referred to. The power that is manifested in magnetism rising up out of the Earth at night is negative, or less than the power descending in daylight, and their conjunctive line is near the Earth's surface. Hence, 5 or 6 miles altitude, it is intense cold, while 500 or 600 is so cold that people could not possibly measure it. In the early days of the Earth, when there was more heat emitted from the Earth than at present, it also rose to greater altitude, but it was nevertheless thrown back to a great extent every day, even after the same manner it is today, by the force lens referred to, and as of the heat, so also of the light. In the sum of all the universe, there was and is now and ever shall be the same latent amount of heat and light. The force in formation drives them to a centre for a period of time. Nevertheless, a time comes when the heat and light escape outward, and though the force lens recasts them back in a measure, thus producing day and warmth on the face of the Earth, yet there is ever a trifling loss towards perpetual coldness and darkness. This great hemispherical lens, atmosphere, not only manufactures light and heat, but also affords living things the means of seeing the sun and moon and stars. It has the power also of magnifying millions of comparatively dense Etherian worlds so that man can see through them. The student should also consider this from the standpoint of a magnifying lens in a microscope, which has power to distend many things so one can see through their fibres, which to the naked eye seem dense. For Etheria is not nearly so rarefied as people suppose. Without the Earth's atmospherian lens, man could see the moon and stars, and the sun itself would seem as a pale red star. As the force of the Earth is thus to the lens, so the moon's forces to the moon, and also of the sun and other stars and planets where light and heat are manifested. When the moon is half full, a dim line out of the shadow side of the moon is to be seen with the naked eye. This is being called by scientists and philosophers the Earth's shine, for they ignorantly believed the light of the Earth was reflected on the moon. The real cause of this sunlight on the moon is in consequence of the action of a sublens on the moon facing the Earth's force, which operates after the same manner as the other. When the moon produces a full eclipse of the sun, by which philosophers and scientists ignorantly believed the light and heat of the sun were cut off from the Earth, it causes darkness on the Earth by breaking the linear context between the Earth's force and the sun's centre, so that the positive current in the Earth's force is cut off. and that part would be otherwise a lens, and becomes negative in its action in the linear space. But when the eclipse falls far in the north or south part of the Earth only, then the action of the moon's shadow will fall in the direction of the Earth's lens, so that a sublens is impossible. Whereas, were there such a thing as Earth's shine, in time of total eclipse of the sun, the equatorial light would make the moon shine at that time also. As light and heat and magnetism and electricity are all one and the same thing, which are the manifestations of the force and its currents under different conditions, do not lose sight of the fact that none of these so-called things are things actually, that is, entities of themselves, separately or combined. The power of the force can be charged, as before mentioned, into iron and other substances. When it is charged in iron, it is called magnetism. When charged in phosphorus, it is called light, inactive. When charged in nitrate, silver, it is called darkness. If its application be continued on phosphorus, the latter will combine with common air and ignite. With phosphorus and without it, it will, as before stated, combine oxygen and hydrogen, and it will also separate them. And yet, power of the force, in fact, is no substance or thing as such, but is the force in axial and orbital motion. In other words, physical substances in an etheric solution. As previously stated, ether holds physical substance in solution, which is the condition of atmosphere and of the etherian regions beyond. When a portion of this solution is a rotary motion, it is called the force. Nor is a force a substance or thing of itself, more than is a whirlwind or as a whirlpool in the water. As a whirlpool cannot exist without water, or a whirlwind exist without air, so cannot a force exist without the etheric solution. As previously stated, in the beginning of a force, it is long, but in course of time it has a tendency to become round like a globe, but flattened a little at the poles. It also happens to every force that carries a satellite, that the periphery of the force is undulated, and the extent of its undulation can be determined by the minimum and maximum distance of the satellite from its planet. In consequence of this discrepancy, the lens power of the force of the Earth varies constantly, even daily, monthly, and yearly. Nevertheless, the sum of heat and cold and the sum of light and darkness are nearly the same. One generation, 33 years, with one another. This was, by the ancient prophets, called the first rule in prophecy. This was again subdivided by 3 into 11 years, where it was found that one 11 years nearly corresponded with another 11 years. This was called the second rule in prophecy. The third rule was 99 years, where it was added 1 year. In the case of the tides, a still further allowance of 6 years was found necessary to 200, but in the succeeding 400 years a deduction was required of 5 years, whereupon the moon's time was 18 years. As the lens power loses by flattening the force and increases by rounding the Earth, it will be observed that the position of the Moon's force relative to the Earth's is a fair conclusion as to the times of ebb and flood tide. In periods of 33 years, therefore, tables can be constructed expressing very nearly the variations of power of the force for every day in the year, and to predict correctly as to the winters and summers, so far as light and darkness and heat and cold are concerned. This flattening mid-rounding of the force lens of the Earth is one cause of the wonderful differences between the heat of one summer compared with another, and of the difference in the coldness of winters as compared with one another. Of these also tables can be made. Winter tables, made by the ancients based on periods of 666 years, were called Satan's tables, or the times of the beast. Tables made on such a basis are superior to calculations made on the relative position of the moon. But where they have predicted ebb and flood tide to be caused by certain positions of the moon, they have erred in suffering themselves to be ignorantly believe the lay cause of the moon. A man may predict by a travelling wagon what time it will reach town, but the correctness of his prediction does not prove that the wagon pushed the horse to town. These revelations pertain more to the cause of things than to giving new predictions. What people cannot discover by any physical observation must come by inspiration. Planetary disturbances are not caused by any power or effect of one planet on another, but the cause of the disturbances lies in the forces wherein they float. People cannot see the forces. Their only means of predicting lies in physical substance. A man may predict of the moon by calculations of the disturbances of the tides, but to attribute the cause of the tides to the moon's position would be more erroneous than to attribute the wagon to the horse. It is not the intention here to give new calculations in regard to occurrences on the planets. It is a trifling difference whether a man may predict by a force or by the planet itself, wherein he errs in regard to judging the cause of things. He should put right on the right road, wherein he has no knowledge of the forces and currents of the unseen worlds and their dominion over the seen worlds. Revelation can only reach him like that. They have said there are 5 elements of physical substances, then again 60, then 100. But in time they will say there are millions, and yet all of them are comprehended in the world physical substance, corporeal things. To resolve them, discover them and classify them in the combination is the work of scientists. Where they are aggravated together as the earth, the result is called a creation or a created world. When such a globe is dissolved in ether and sublimated, it is said a world is destroyed or a star is destroyed. Nevertheless, in any of these operations, not one ingredient as such is annihilated. What is creation more than if made a drop of rain, or the dissolution of a world more than the evaporation of a drop of rain? Pour a few drops of water on a table covered with dust, and each drop will become a globe. Look for them tomorrow, and they are gone, have evaporated. The globe is annihilated, for it was not a thing in fact, but the water, which was the thing, is not annihilated, but evaporated. The term annihilation applies to such as are not things in fact, but which are forms and figures, a ray of light, so called, can be annihilated, but that what comprised it cannot be annihilated.